Imagine this, you're dropped into a world like GTA, but instead of being the main character, you're just an NPC, an overlooked side character no one cares about. That's Kim Ha-jun's reality. Author's worst nightmare. Trapped in his own novel with no escape. But interestingly, Kim is the creator of this very story, the same world he's now trapped in. At first, everything about this tale seemed typical. Like many other stories, dungeons and monsters appeared all over the planet, throwing everything into chaos. Humanity was pushed to the brink of destruction. Korea became one of the worst places to live on Earth. But as always, there were champions with extraordinary powers who began defeating the creatures and clearing out the dungeons. Hero organizations formed, and thanks to their efforts, Korea transformed into one of the most thriving nations. To train the greatest heroes, an academy called the Cube was established. In this tale, there was a central protagonist and his rival, but our hero was neither of them. Upon arriving in this world, the author seemed to develop an unusual ability. He could clearly hear what people in the crowd were saying about Kim Soo-ho's growing reputation. Some spoke highly of Soo-ho, while others didn't, but their words weren't what concerned our protagonist. What surprised him was being able to hear every single voice, even though he sat far from the crowd. When Kim Soo-ho's remarkable achievements were brought up, the Cube's headmaster was amazed. She was even more impressed by Soo-ho's age, as he had managed to achieve so much by the age of 17. The name Kim Soo-ho echoed in the writer's mind. Soo-ho was supposed to be the main hero of the story, the one destined to lead this broken world into an age of peace and order. Being the classic typical hero, Soo-ho possessed both the kindness of a savior and a strong determination for what was right. What intrigued the author even more was the fact that Soo-ho had a deep secret, one he was protecting at all costs. But putting that aside, the writer's attention shifted to Soo-ho's rival, the one meant to challenge him in the story and create conflict. This adversary entered the scene as the second-best cadet, Shin Jung-hak. He's a confident, perhaps even overly proud, individual. He fit the mold of a privileged rich kid, as his father owned one of the top companies in the nation. The writer noted that Jung-hak's abilities could pose a real threat to Soo-ho, especially since Jung-hak would eventually become a villain. At this stage, all these key characters were still just trainees, but soon, Jung-hak's constant comparisons to Soo-ho and his feelings of inferiority would lead him down a dark path. In the future, Jung-hak would embrace his role as the villain, opposing Soo-ho in an effort to surpass him. Like two sides of the same coin, representing light and darkness, Soo-ho and Jung-hak would clash in the days ahead, though for now, they stood as equals. Both main characters were right in front of the author's eyes. Once again, he was sure this was the world he had written about. This raised an important question. If Soo-ho and Jung-hak were the stars of the story, what role did the author himself have to play? Was he significant in any way? He thought that if he were living inside his own novel, he should at least have a proper name. His thoughts were interrupted when another student addressed him as Chondon and asked if he'd gotten any sleep. The author, now overwhelmed with a million questions, he asked the chubby guy, "Who's Chundung?" The chubby guy replied, "You're Chundung. Who else would I be talking about?" This revealed that his NPC name is Kim Chundung. He had hoped to be someone important or at least have a noteworthy role, as is common in transmigration stories, but this Chundung fellow was so random that even the author didn't remember writing him into the story. Hoping for some clarity, the author thought that maybe looking at his reflection would jog his memory, but the biggest mystery was this: who was Chundung supposed to be? The funniest part of this bizarre situation came when the author realized that his face was completely blank like a question mark. It was as if he wasn't important enough for the world to even give him a proper appearance. Faced with this strange reality, the author was stunned as he tried to process the situation. It hit him. There was something incredibly humbling about discovering your face was literally a blank slate. But here's the thing, Chundung wasn't even a character the author had planned to include in the story. He had no defining traits, no unique identity, and no meaningful place in the world he himself had created. The writer sinks into despair as he realizes that even the people around him are ignoring his blank, featureless face. It's as if he's a GTA NPC, a nobody who doesn't matter. Inside the cube, he's the most average person and will probably never cross paths with the main characters or change their fates. If you've ever felt like you weren't the lead character in your own life, think about this guy's situation. He's not just a side character, he's barely even that, just a placeholder filling a spot in the story. Feeling crushed, the writer shrinks into himself, understanding he's nothing more than an unimportant extra in his own tale. Now, let's rewind a little to figure out how he ended up in this mess. One day, the author received an unexpected email offering to remake his novel, The Returned Hero. This fantasy story, written by Kim Ha-jun, had been abandoned for over 6 months because of a massive writing block. Ever start a project but find yourself unable to finish it? That's exactly what happened to Ha-jun. When he read the email, he thought his readers might be asking for a fresh take on the story, especially since he hadn't updated it in so long. Already feeling guilty about neglecting his book, he wondered if it was just a joke or a strange fan request. Wanting to be responsible, he replied to the email. But what seemed like a tiny, unimportant decision ended up changing his life forever. That simple response set off the chain of events that led to him waking up inside his own creation. Now back to where we left off. Our faceless author is beginning to get used to his strange appearance. It's been 2 weeks, 14 whole days, and nothing has changed. His face is still a mystery. These 2 weeks have been enough to confirm that this is not a dream. He really is living inside the world of his novel. Everything in the book is something Hojin himself imagined and brought to life. And now he's walking among the characters he created. The person whose body he now inhabits, Kim Choi-dong, is just one of the many minor characters in the story. Despite being in this body, Hojin is completely clueless about how or why he ended up here. Naturally, he's tried everything he could think of to figure it out, but his efforts have led nowhere. He has no answers about who or what is responsible for his current situation. Even worse, he's unsure how he's going to survive in this dangerous world, especially since there's no way for him to go back home. Hojin calculates that it could take 10 years to reach the point in the story where he had stopped writing. The thought of surviving for an entire decade in this unfamiliar world terrifies him. The fact that his face is still blank doesn't make things any better. He mourns the life he left behind and dreads being stuck in an unfinished novel with no conclusion in sight. Exhausted and desperate, Hojin once again tries to figure out how to reverse the process that brought him here. The only possible way out that he can think of is to somehow reach the part of the story where he stopped writing. If he manages to keep going until the story is halfway complete, maybe he'll be freed from this nightmare. With no other plan, he decides that's what he's going to aim for. But to achieve this goal, he'll have to relive life as a high school student. Let's shift our attention to the Cube, the training center where all the action happens. It's a man-made island designed to train the best heroes for the future. It's like a small city with 50,000 people living there, showcasing humanity's most advanced magic and technology. The Cube is the reason Korea is considered a superpower in this story. Standing before the Cube's hero training center, Hojin reflects on how it's the main stage of his novel. Everything important takes place here. The training center is a stunning blue structure where heroes master their unique abilities. These powers, called gifts, are what make the characters in Hojin's stories so special. Only the top-tier heroes, the very best, are chosen to become cadets at the Cube. Kim Choi-dong, whose body Hojin is now inhabiting, is one of these cadets. This means that he must have some abilities of his own. The problem is, Hojin has no idea what those powers are. He's starting from zero, unsure of what skills or talents Choi-dong might have. Even though Hojin feels completely lost, he's confident that Choi-dong must have some connection to the Cube's training center. He's determined to gather whatever resources he can to give himself an edge, because that's the only way he has any chance of surviving in this intimidating school filled with competitive cadets. Hojin walks into class, Veritas, a room known as the heart of the Cube's training facility. This room holds everyone, the strong, the weak, the beautiful, and the not. There's Jung-hak and even the novel's protagonist, Soo-ho, soon. These characters will pursue their own goals and encounter events that will set many things into motion. Hojin sits down at his desk feeling annoyed at the idea of spending 10 long years in the same class with these people. To make it worse, he doesn't even have a proper face to present himself with confidence. It's the most frustrating outcome the author could imagine. After class ends, the students return to their dorms, and Hojin is no exception. He can't even figure out how to describe his day. He wonders how he managed to stay focused in class, something he hadn't done since his first time in high school. Suddenly, a delivering package grabs his attention. This catches him off guard, as he never included anything about deliveries in the world of his novel. As he opens the box, countless thoughts swirl in his mind. Could these be Chandong's belongings? To his utter disbelief, it's his own laptop. None of it makes sense, not even to Hojin. An item like this shouldn't exist in this world. The laptop boots up and the system screen appears. Startling him, Hojin instinctively drops the laptop in shock. The screen flashes, showing a message about his synchronization with Choi-dong. The system quickly downloads all the relevant data and displays several status, such as strength, intelligence, and even luck. What surprises him more is that these are the exact status Hojin had written into the novel himself. Questions flood his mind, but before he can make sense of anything, his body starts to change as the synchronization completes. The screen goes blank for a moment before flashing a new message. He has unlocked the setting intervention ability. The once faceless body of Choi-dong morphs into Hojin's real form, resetting all his status. Hojin's reality has been completely rewritten. This time, when he looks in the mirror, he doesn't see a question mark staring back at him. Instead, he sees a real face, his actual face. However, things are far from simple. Dozens of system screens suddenly appear, and Hojin has no idea what any of them mean. The system confirms the synchronization process, leaving Hojin to wonder if this is tied to a unique process called enlightenment. Enlightenment, as it's described in this world, is an awakening that happens when a person breaks through their limits. Hojin knows this because he's the one who created the concept. After experiencing enlightenment, a person's powers, skills, and talents are converted into a digital format, making them easier to access. The real shock for Hajin is the potential growth his body can now achieve. Enlightenment allows him to become much stronger, a chance he never thought possible. Put simply, Hajin can now see his status window, which displays various points and details about his abilities. One of his skills is observation, a fairly basic ability, while another is reading. His status also appear, though they aren't particularly impressive or noteworthy. Hajin decides to carefully examine each of the status screens, one by one. The most intriguing screen is the synchronization tab. It's what transformed him from Choindong back into his original form, causing the complete reset. What he discovers on the screen is beyond anything he could have imagined. Although he doesn't fully understand how everything changed, Hajin is sure the synchronization process is what altered his appearance. It also explains why his status are far weaker compared to Choindong, who is supposed to be a proper cadet at the academy. However, instead of focusing on status, Hajin gets points to make up for these weaknesses. Alright, with that settled, Hajin directs his attention to the unique authority tab. This ability lets him create items by spending SP points. Using it consumes his SP bar, but it opens up many new possibilities. SP, or story points, are only earned as the plot moves forward, and his role in the story becomes more significant. Interestingly, Hajin doesn't recall writing anything about story points in his novel. The author starts realizing that if he increases his role in the story, he can influence events and earn more story points as a result. Slowly, he begins to connect the dots about why he has access to the laptop and status screens. It's because his role is to face incredible challenges, fight monsters, and ultimately steer the main storyline. Hajin, frustrated by this conclusion, can't help but curse the very story he created. But before he can vent further, another screen pops up unexpectedly. It contains classified details about something. Feeling stuck, Hajin grows irritated knowing he has to interfere in this world if he wants even the smallest chance of going back to his old life. Resigned, he turns to his laptop and starts working. Realizing he has no other option, Hajin decides it's better to act now than to wait for the plot to reach the point where his novel ended. Even so, there's no guarantee he'll return to his original world when he reaches that part of the story. He thinks that even if the confidential data doesn't directly help him get home, it might still provide valuable hints to navigate this new world and help him connect with the main characters. To achieve his goals, Hajin knows he must fight and grow stronger. He begins using his points to ensure he can survive the unfolding events. Speaking of upgrading and boosting points, Hajin reflects on how his novel doesn't include the usual concept of freely improving one's status. The typical leveling up mechanics from other stories aren't present in his story. The only way to enhance abilities is by using points, making them an essential resource. The most efficient way to spend points, he realizes, is by investing in the luck status. Unlike other status, luck isn't restricted and always provides some benefit. It helps with wealth, bonuses, and even forming relationships. A perfect status for making everyday life easier. Essentially, it's like a cheat code for life. However, luck points themselves can't be raised directly, which makes Hajin wonder if he can manipulate his luck by converting points into SP points. To test this theory, Hajin attempts a small experiment by transferring 10 points into 10,000 SP points. Next, he uses 9,000 SP points to enhance his luck status, giving it a boost of 9. The mysterious luck ability kicks in, slightly increasing his passive luck status by 1. This proves that luck's passive effect can even improve itself, making it an extremely valuable status. Satisfied, Hajin turns his focus to the protagonist Suho's status. Suho's magic status stands strong at 9, which is its maximum limit. However, Hajin has now surpassed it by raising his luck status to 9.1. With his remaining story points, Hajin invests in perseverance to help him endure the academy's rigorous training. The boost to his luck status also enhances his perseverance, making him feel grateful as the improvements are already showing results. Out of nowhere, the system malfunctions and displays a warning screen. It turns out Hajin's meddling with probability has caused an error. Since he was essentially exploiting the system, it sets a restriction to prevent this from happening again. From now on, Hajin is barred from modifying abstract status using story points. The author is a little peeved that he was hit with a restriction like that, because otherwise he would be too overpowered. Hajin realizes that he has hit a wall with his gimmicks. But still, he managed to increase both luck and perseverance to a high level, which should be enough for him to overcome many obstacles in the story. A thought crosses his mind. He gained 10,000 story points for being a novice. Those points can be used pretty sparingly. Hajin wants to put more thought into what he's going to invest them in, so for now, he decides to keep them aside. The next morning he shows up in his class. Their professor gives them an introduction. Kim Soo-hyuk will be acting as their instructor for the next year. He's globally recognized as one of the most capable heroes, notably standing in the intermediate grade 5 rank in the association. Concluding his introduction, the man alludes to his point. He mentions how the institution known as the Cube isn't just a fancy place for the cadets to enjoy as they please. Its most reliable indicator is the student grade, which means failing to achieve them and uphold them to a standard will end up with the cadet getting kicked out. It's also not easy to just maintain one's grades, as only half of the cadets will even manage to survive the program without bailing. The institution strives and cultivates the next generation of heroes, so their category for judgment will also be harsh. The instructor commands Tay students to get up and follow his lead, as the first schedule will talk about deciding on a main weapon for each cadet. Entering the weapons room, the students are left speechless, eyeing down on all kinds of beautiful yet terrifying weapons. Their amazement was quickly shattered by their strict, no-nonsense teacher, who reminds them that this isn't playtime for them to enjoy, and commands the students to pick a weapon at once. He also advises them that after choosing a weapon, they won't be able to switch from it for at least 6 months, which means, if you make a mistake now, you'll be stuck for half a year with a terrible weapon. Kim Soo-ho, the protagonist of the novel, is drawn towards a sword, and finds himself satisfied holding it. One of the girls decides to pick a bow and arrow, believing that she's fit to become an archer. Then there's a girl with blonde hair, who prefers a rapier for precise strikes. The other students also choose different weapons like whips and other things. The author, Hyejin, is contemplating how most of the main characters are simply choosing weapons without giving it a second thought, but instead of focusing on what they're choosing, he has to ultimately decide one weapon for himself. As he lays down his options, Hyejin believes that he has to be careful, because even the slightest misstep could become a problem for him. His current stats are seriously low, so he can't compare to other cadets when it comes to weapons like spears or swords. The same goes for defensive shields. To make his selection process simpler, Hyejin decides to carve out a bunch of conditions for his weapon selection. The first aspect he is considering is that the weapon has been used in his previous world, and the second factor is that he should be able to adapt to it with ease. When it comes down to those two factors, Hyejin finally decides to choose his weapon. His selection in particular draws the attention of the rest of the students, even their teacher. Their teacher is bewildered and particularly addresses Hyejin, asking if the gun he is holding in his hand is really the weapon he's going to select. Everyone whispered about him choosing the gun as his weapon of choice. Hyejin receives a stare from his teacher, who is confused because he remembers the cadet listing himself as a sword user back at his academy. Deciding to come up with an excuse, Hyejin states that he changed his mind. It's a surprising reason for his teacher to accept, who can't grasp why Hyejin would decide to switch his weapon of expertise right when he entered the academy. The teacher confirms his choice as the student chooses their own fate in the cube. In a wave of frustration, he advises Hyejin to remember that his responsibility for choosing his fate rests with him. Suddenly, the author's super hearing ability kicks into overdrive. He hears murmurs of the other students making fun of him for picking a gun. None of them can comprehend his reason for using a firearm in an academy that is supposed to bring up elite heroes. Some of them even wonder if they should advise him during combat practice, taking him for an attention seeker and nothing more. Despite the crybabies making fun of this man, the author explains that guns are actually reliable even in this world. They're the best weapon for ordinary people who don't have access to magical superpowers. The bullets used in this world are of a special kind. Magic bullets have mana imbued inside of them, releasing a destructive shot that's even more devastating and wrathful than normal bullets. However, those are the only advantages of a gun. The reason they're seen as a terrible choice and neglected for their use is because they don't have the ability to grow in power. This is demonstrated by Kim Horak, who effortlessly smashes a bullet with his bare fists. The author further adds that the limitation of the magic bullets rests in their destructive power, which is always fixed no matter who is using the weapon. The second reason relates to their build. They have a weak origin and formation. This world differs from the real one, in the sense that myths and legends are actually materialized. These myths and relics are given form and made into weapons, causing the wielder an immense advantage in battle. The older the origin, the greater is the formation, overall boosting the weapon's grade hierarchy, which is the most crucial factor for how effective it is. Because of that, nobody among the cadets tries to pick weapons that are modern and newly created, since they have weak origin points for being made in the modern era. Older medieval weapons take more preference and are generally stronger. Instead of relying on the destructive power of the magic bullets, they rely on their personal skills, and even skyrocket their growth using the weapon's power, surpassing their limitations. But everything Hyejin mentioned so far is basically useless for him. He's got nothing to benefit from, and he's definitely not the protagonist of the story. He doesn't know how a sword works, and believes his skills with a melee weapon will be far worse than the other cadets. Internalizing his thought process, Hyejin believes that he chose a gun for a good reason. He knows how to use it and it will effectively help him earn story points, because simply using the gun is bound to help him stand out among his peers. The more important he is to the story, the more story points he will earn.